Welcome to St Chad's Church here in Uppermill, Saddleworth, a place sometimes rather wonderfully described as the Parish on the Moor. And when you stand here, high above the valley, with the hills rolling away towards Saddleworth Moor, you can understand exactly why. This is a place where the landscape and the history belong together. The church sits above Uppermill, surrounded by the dramatic Pennine scenery, and the churchyard itself is a wonderful mixture of the picturesque and the slightly more macabre that I like to look for. There's been a place of worship here since at least the medieval period. The first Saddleworth chapel is recorded here in 1215, when it was established as a chapel of ease. The present church, however, dates largely from the 19th century, being built between 1831 and 33, replacing an earlier building on the same site. As usual, I'm far more interested in what lies outside the church than inside it, because surrounding St Chad's are two very different sections of Churchyard, and naturally I headed straight for the oldest part. The upper graveyard has an atmosphere of its own. Before you even start wandering among the graves, you're greeted by two wonderful reminders of a much older Saddleworth, the ancient stocks and the old mounting steps. The stocks, once a very public form of punishment, no discreet little slap on the wrist here. If you found yourself in trouble, your neighbours could quite literally watch you being humiliated in the village. And beside them, the mounting steps, built to help people climb onto their horseback. It's one of those little details I love. They transport you back to another Saddleworth, a time when horses were essential to everyday life, and the churchyard wasn't simply somewhere to visit the dead. Then wandering among the graves, I found exactly what I'd hoped for. Old stones, lots of them, and wonderfully, many still legible. Some lovely flat-laid stones and table tombs dating from the 18th century, the sort of graves I could quite happily spend hours examining. You can stand there, read the names, dates and fragments of lives from 200 or 300 years ago, and that's what I love about old churchyards. They're not just collections of gravestones, they're little archives in stone. A name that's otherwise disappeared from the landscape can suddenly be brought back into existence simply because someone carved it here. And then, because apparently I wasn't already distracted enough by the 18th century, I noticed something rather intriguing beside some wrought iron railings. A crypt. Unfortunately, it wasn't accessible, so that made me want to go even more. But through the railings I could see an open doorway leading into the darkness, and there's something irresistibly atmospheric about an old crypt door standing open when you can't actually go through it. You don't need ghosts, you don't need anything supernatural. Sometimes an old doorway, a little darkness, and the knowledge that generations of people have been buried beneath your feet is quite enough. But then, just when the churchyard was becoming suitably solemn, I was introduced to some rather more flamboyant residents. Peafowl. Two magnificent peacocks, a peahen, and best of all a little chick. Now, I've visited a lot of churchyards. I've encountered cats, dogs, squirrels, rabbits, and the occasional unimpressed sheep. But 3 peafowl and a baby wandering around an ancient churchyard on the edge of Saddleworth Moors, that's something you don't see every day. And I have to admit, they rather stole the show for a while. There was something wonderfully surreal about standing among 18th century graves while a peacock strutted past, as though he owned the place. And perhaps he does. But eventually I left the upper yard and made my way down to the lower graveyard. And this time I wasn't simply looking for old stones, I was looking for a very particular grave, because buried here is the reason St Chad's Churchyard has become such an important location for anyone fascinated by the darker side of Saddleworth's history. I was looking for Billow Jacks, or more accurately, the grave of William Bradbury and his son Thomas. And their story is one of those extraordinary pieces of local history that sounds almost too macabre to be true. But it is. The year was 1832. William Bradbury was 84 years old and lived at the remote Moor Inn, on the road between Greenfield and Holmfirth. The inn was officially known as a Cherry Tree, but William was known locally as Billow Jacks, Bill, the son of Jack, and the nickname became attached to the inn itself. His son Thomas was living and working alongside him. On the night of Monday the 2nd of April, 1832, something terrible happened. The following morning, William and Thomas were discovered at the isolated inn, both horribly injured. The scene was described in contemporary reports as one of extraordinary violence, with blood throughout the premises. 12-year-old Amelia Winterbottom, Thomas's niece and William's granddaughter, was among those who discovered what had happened. Both men died from their injuries, and what followed was something that seems almost unimaginable today. The murder became a sensation. Newspapers carried the story far beyond Saddleworth. People began travelling to see the scene for themselves. In fact, thousands of curious visitors reportedly descended upon the area. The crime scene itself became a macabre attraction. People wanted to see the place where the murders had happened. This was, in effect, an early example of dark tourism. People travelling specifically to witness a place associated with a notorious crime. And despite investigations, suspicions and accusations, the mystery was never satisfactorily solved. Nobody was ever convicted. A £100 reward was offered for information, leading to the apprehension of those responsible, a considerable sum in 1832, but it was never claimed. So the identity of the murderer, or murderers, remains lost somewhere in the darkness of Saddleworth's past. The Moorcock Inn itself survived for more than another century, but was finally demolished in 1937. But the victims remain here. And this is where the story becomes particularly fascinating. Because the Bradburys weren't given some ordinary little memorial, their enormous, flat, sandstone grave slab carries an extraordinary inscription. It begins, "Here lie the dreadfully bruised and lacerated bodies of William Bradbury and Thomas, his son." It goes on to describe how the two men were savagely murdered in what it calls an unusually horrid manner. It records their ages, William 84 and Thomas 46, and then comes the really remarkable part. The inscription tells us that their deaths created such enormous interest that thousands came to see the scene of the catastrophe. And then, almost like a Victorian epitaph turned into a poem, it ends by reflecting on their fate. One house, one business, one bed, and one most shocking death they had. One funeral came, one inquest passed, and now one grave they have at last. And there they are now, 2 centuries later almost, lying together in one grave, still telling their story, still attracting the curious. There's something quite chilling about standing here and reading those words, because this isn't folklore that grew up generations later. This stone itself preserves the contemporary horror. It tells us what happened, who died, when they died, and perhaps more importantly, that nobody ever discovered exactly who had killed them. And that unanswered question is what gives the Billow Jack's grave its extraordinary power. We can speculate, we can examine the evidence, we can listen to old theories, but we cannot solve it. All we can do is stand here, read the names, remember William and Thomas Bradbury, and perhaps that's the real purpose of a graveyard, not to simply frighten us, not to simply provide atmospheric locations for scary stories, but to preserve the memory of people whose lives would otherwise have disappeared completely. From ancient stocks, 18th century stones, to a mysterious crypt, from unexpectedly glamorous peacocks to one of Saddleworth's most notorious unsolved murders. St Chad's really does have a little bit of everything, and I think that's why I love these old churchyards so much. You never quite know what you're going to find. You might go looking for history, you might discover folklore, you might encounter a peacock, and if you're particularly unlucky, or particularly fortunate, depending on your point of view, you might just stumble across a murder mystery that's been waiting nearly 200 years to be solved again. And on the edge of Saddleworth Moor, I couldn't think of anywhere that's more appropriate.